Right now, I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Kathleen Jackson. She is one of the 3 directors at the Water Development Board under their new makeup. And you've got in your package her bio, but she was appointed by Governor Perry back in March of 2014, and she's very smart, and she knows a little bit about everything. She and her husband, before he passed away, they have the rice farm, and so she's up to date on environmental, industrial. She spent many years. She's an engineer for. I know we have a lot of those in the room, and has worked in public affairs as well. So y'all can read a little bit about her there. But on a personal note, I will tell you that she's just been a real breath of fresh air at the Water Development Board. She's delightful to talk to. She's very accessible. And as all of the directors like to say, they are open for business and they want business. And so she's going to talk today about the SWIFT funding. And if you're as confused about that as all the rest of us are, well, hopefully they'll give a little light. And then Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and introduce him real quick. And I am going to let you read this, but he works with the board. He's a lawyer with the firm of McCall, Parkhurst, and Harton up in Dallas, right, Jeff? And he's been providing them assistance on all the legislation. So he sort of knows all the ins and outs of what they've been doing this year, since this is a brand new thing and a brand new world. And so, Kathleen, please welcome her.
Listen, before she gets away, I just want everybody to know how precious Carol is and how respected she is around the state. I've worked over the years. I was 37 years in the private sector, and you see people throughout your career who are advocates for a cause, but Carol not only always knows the information, but she has this wonderful knack of making you want to do whatever it is she wants you to do. So she's fabulous. She's a wonderful partner, and I got to tell you, for moving water conservation and reuse forward in the state of Texas, I mean, we couldn't do without her. So thank you for sharing her with us.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm with the Texas Water Development Board. I'm one of the 3 directors, as Carol was sharing with you. I'm a little bit of an anomaly because usually folks kind of start out in the public sector and then they move to the private sector. And I spent 37 years working in the oil and gas industry, started out in engineering. I came to Texas, went to school in North Carolina, but came here as quick as I could. Met my husband, and when we were courting, he said, Kathleen, you know, we make the perfect couple because people have to have food. I'm a farmer, and they have to have energy. And so I've really been blessed, I think, over the years of all the folks that have, if you will, invested in me. And I was so excited when the governor, you know, made this opportunity available, because I really wanted to take everything that I had done over the years, working with folks in the environmental arena, working with wastewater treatment plants, working with the River Authority, working with communities, and kind of building relationships and taking all those things and doing something that was impactful. And I really feel that I'm very honored to have this opportunity. I take it very seriously, and I think we have a great opportunity before us and before Texas to do some amazing things. And what I wanted to kind of do today is to kind of brief you overall on what's going on, because you're the most important key in the whole process. We can have the money and we can have the technology, but local communities are the ones. It's a bottom-up process in Texas, so it's local community leaders that have to ask the question, have the vision, put the leadership in place, and then build the projects that we need to be able to have the water that we're going to need for our children and for our children's children. So you're an important part of the process, and to the extent you can help us carry this message that we're going to talk about today, I think that's what's really going to make us successful. There's lots of talk in Texas, of course, about water, and it's really driven by a couple of things. One is the drought that we're in, and you know, I would pretty much submit to you that Texas has almost been over history, almost in perpetual drought. The work that we do at the Water Development Board is grounded on what we call the drought of record, which occurred back in the 50s. And if you kind of remember the response to the drought of the 50s, which had a huge detrimental impact, particularly on agriculture, was to basically go out and to build reservoirs. And they built reservoirs around the state. They were really directed towards flood control and power generation. We have those reservoirs in place today. In many areas of Texas, had we not built those reservoirs, there are communities that would be without water. But I think what we're learning is that as we move forward, we've got to think in broader terms than just reservoirs and think about other strategies. So water's a big topic because of the drought and because of the weather. And then also, depending on who you talk to, people are coming to Texas and they're coming at either 1,000 people a day or 1,200 people a day, depending on who you're talking. And none of them are bringing any water with them. So we want to continue to have the quality of life that we enjoy today. And we want to, Texas to continue to be a business-friendly climate. Because, if you talk to the folks in the economic development world, they'll tell you that it's much different than even what it was several years ago. Used to be if you were interested in bringing an investment to your community, you'd bring all of the community folks in, they'd sit down at a table, and the people who were bringing the opportunity would come in and you'd go around the room and you'd share with them what you had to offer. Now with the internet, they know more than you do about your community. And what they want to know is, tell me about how I can get a reliable, abundant, and dependable supply of water. Tell me about your transportation network. How can I get my product to market? And oh, by the way, tell me about your skilled workforce. So having a reliable, dependable supply of water is going to be important as we move forward. And of course, in the economic development world, there's no standing still. You have to continue to draw that investment. So important that we put some things in place that are impactful, and again, that we engage communities in doing so. So what are some of these new strategies that we're looking at beyond just new reservoirs? And I've kind of seen this from my standpoint. I'm from East Texas, where we get 60 inches of rain a year. It's not unusual to get 12 inches in a given day. So there's lots of water. And for the longest, it was just we need to take the water from where it is and move it to where it's needed. And I think as communities in other parts of the state started to look at it, they said, well, first of all, nobody's going to sell their water rights. They're going to enter into a contract, and the cost of that water starts the very day that you sign on the bottom line. Secondly, you've got to acquire the waterways, which are costly. You've got to build the infrastructure, which is easily $1 million a mile. And then you have the operating costs associated with pumping the water to where it needs to be. And then the water is it's kind of like it's not in your own backyard. So I think folks around Texas are starting to kind of think in broader terms, looking at different strategies. And I just put some of them up here, which I think have, huge promise. Of course, you not only can get if you have reservoirs, you're dependent on it raining, and also huge evaporative losses associated with reservoirs. For example, in the city of Wichita Falls, their evaporative losses are 3 times what their consumption is. So having a new type of strategy, such as underground aquifer storage and recovery, which SAWS and many others, the San Antonio River Authority and many others are pursuing. If you can kind of picture kind of a tall vase that is kind of like underground, and so as you either desalinate water or you harvest water, if you need it, you use it. If you don't, then you store it underground. There are no evaporative losses, and it helps you in terms of having water when you need it. So underground aquifer storage and recovery is very much a strategy that communities are looking for or looking towards. The farmers will tell you that there's an ocean of water under Texas. It's not all fresh. It's brackish or slightly salty, slightly saline. And so a lot of communities are looking at how can they harvest that brackish water, how can they put in wells and recover the brackish water and treat it and use it for their community needs. The technology is totally there. And what we can do as the Water Development Board is we are kind of the keepers of all water data for Texas. And we have the data, it's all available out online. And we can pretty much share with you, if you call in as an individual or as a community or as a company, where the brackish water is as well as where the fresh water is. So many communities are looking towards treating brackish water to meet some of their freshwater supply needs. In addition to reservoirs, groundwater wells, which harvest the fresh water, and brackish desal, the other thing you see up there is conservation and reuse. And of course, that is, if you will, the cheapest source of water of any of them that are up there, because literally you just have to many times change behaviors. And what we're seeing that communities are doing around Texas is something that was kind of akin to what we did back in the dark ages when I started in the manufacturing business. For years, we would be energy consumers internal to the company. And, you know, someone kind of hit on this bright idea, well, why don't we start measuring our steam usage? And I remember it took forever to convince somebody that we needed to put a meter on something that we weren't selling or that we weren't bringing in for custody transfer. And I'm not sure that we ever really put the first meter in a way that it was something that kind of everybody knew that that was what it was going to be used for. I think they kind of maybe slipped it in on another project. But it started when the meter started turning and it started showing up on the reports that the folks around the plant were noticing. It got people's attention. And then they started looking at it. And then guess what happened? Energy usage started going down. So now you didn't just want to have one meter. Let's put meters on everything. Let's start monitoring. It's the same thing, I think, what you're going to see for water usage, particularly for municipalities. If we can put our water usage in a term and in a format that people can understand. So when you get your water bill, you see, okay, how many gallons did my family use that month? And then for communities that are really creative, you know, they think about, well, how does that compare? I mean, what's the baseline? So let's start giving them information that says, here's what your family used, and oh, by the way, here's what the family used down the street, and here's what the average is, because I believe people really do want to conserve. They just need to have that impetus to do it, and sometimes it's just having that baseline to know, okay, what's our target, and how are we getting there? So we're seeing communities all over Texas kind of, you know, measuring the water that they use with the whole idea of conserving water. I'm a big believer that water conservation is not something that's separate. It's something that needs to be integral in every project that we undertake, because it's a natural. Communities want to know, if you're going to go out and you're going to build new infrastructure, well, tell me, how efficiently are we using the water that we already have? So as we move forward, I think, you know, one of the things that we are going to make sure as the Water Development Board, as well as I think you'll see communities naturally want to do this, is that when they consider a new project, it's twofold. It's not just develop new water, find new water, but it's also going to be how can we conserve and how can we reuse the water that we have right now. Probably our greatest example right now of a reuse project is, again, back in Wichita Falls. And they were literally, you know, on the 180-day list, which is something the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is a self-reporting thing that says communities have 180 days or less of available water supply. And they actually retooled a desal plant that they had been taking salty water from the Red River and used the plant to start treating their wastewater from their wastewater treatment facility. They worked with TCEQ. Of course, you know, one of the concerns there is that you have to be very, very sure that, you know, you have removed the pathogens, that you've got a system in place to where there are checks and balances all along the way. They brought in very sophisticated equipment so that they could measure the effluent, the quality of the water that was coming in, as well as the quality of the water as it was going through the treatment process. But they are literally now taking the water that is part of that is their wastewater treatment, treating it and bringing it back into the front end of their potable water supply, treating it again, and then that is water for their community. So I think you're going to see more and more reuse projects, not water that's being recycled and putting back on golf courses or using in businesses and commercial, but also, you know, when the situation warrants it. And again, all communities across Texas are different, but also, you know, in certain situations, using it as part of the potable water supply. The last item up here that I thought you'd be really interested in, I think it really piques my interest because we hear about it, and that is seawater desal. We know it's an option. We know it's something that is expensive. It's done all over the world. But I can tell you that in Texas, all the stars are lining up. With the Eagle Ford shale play, we've got a abundant supply of clean burning natural gas. It's drawing manufacturing investment, particularly to Corpus. $20 billion of facilities are coming to Texas. They're building out their grassroots utility infrastructure, and so they're asking the question, okay, where am I going to get water for processing? And in the manufacturing sector, there's nothing that is more valued than reliability. So going to the ocean, where it's abundant, it never runs out, it's reliable, and being able to take that water and treat it, M&G right now is building, and it's part of their new grassroots facility build, a 7 million gallon a day seawater desal plant in order to meet the manufacturing needs that they have for their new plant. And then they're also going to take 2 million gallons a day of their processed water and recycle it. So I think as you see these companies seize the opportunity and look at, okay, how can I get a reliable supply of water? The other thing that is kind of lining up is the big cost of seawater desal is energy, because it's a reverse osmosis process. You're kind of pushing that water molecule, if you will, through the membrane. It's high energy costs. Well, these facilities, again, are driven by reliability, and they're building cogeneration facilities, very efficient and reliable forms of generating power. So all of a sudden, you've got a community that has got, in a business that has generated a very reliable supply of fresh water and a very reliable source of power, and is creating, in my mind, a competitive advantage that's drawing business to Texas. And it's kind of taking care of their own resources and their own needs. And of course, it's scalable. So, if they would so choose, they could make more water available either for additional industry or for additional municipalities. So exciting things that are going on in Texas. It's not just about reservoirs. It's not just about drilling more wells, but it's also about conservation, reuse, and of course harvesting brackish as well as seawater. Kind of at the very heart of what we do at the Water Development Board and also in Texas, and we're unique in terms of other states in that we have a bottom-up planning process. I mean, nobody tells Texans what to do. We believe that local communities know best in terms of how to put the water facilities in place that specifically meet their needs. And I think we have Glenda's here today from Region H. I don't know, Glenda, can you raise, there she is, okay. So we have, if you will, many Glendas across the state, and they represent different backgrounds. They represent agriculture, small communities, large cities, manufacturing, chemical manufacturer, agriculture. And they all come together and they basically say, what do we have today in terms of our water resources? What are we going to need for the future in order to sustain what we have and also to grow? And what are the strategies or the projects that will enable us to get there? And we do this over a 50-year period. So, Texas is unique in this process. So we plan for the future, and those strategies that they put together, they have a consulting firm that works with them, as well as a member of the Water Development Board. He's not a voting member, but is there participating. The outcome of that is very well-vetted and strategic projects that community or those group of communities have come up with in order to meet their future needs. So we take all of the 16 regional water plans, we put them together, and that becomes the state water plan for Texas. So we've been doing water planning for a number of years. It's the backbone of everything we do. And if you look at kind of like, okay, what's the overall kind of like outcome? What does that tell us? Where are we going to get the water for the next 50 years? About a third of it is going to come from new supply. That's the reservoirs, the seawater desal, that is from brackish desal facilities. About a third of it is going to come from conservation and reuse, and that's in the state water plan. So we definitely need projects that will promote those type of activities. And the one thing to kind of point out here is that even though it's going to meet 34% of our needs by volume, it's only going to cost, from a capital standpoint, about 12% of the total capital cost. So again, the most cost-effective new water is water that's probably not new at all. It's just water that you are conserving and making a better use of. And then the third area is going to come from enhanced efficiencies. A great example of that is what's going on right now with the Lower Colorado River Authority. They are building something called an off-channel reservoir. They're moving forward with a loan from the Water Development Board for $250 million. They didn't want to wait on SWIFT, so they're doing it through one of our other loan programs. But if you are a water user and you need water, you call for it, and oftentimes it takes 5 to 7 days to get to you. Well, it rains in the meantime, then that water that you've called for just kind of goes on to the Gulf. So having an off-channel impoundment or an off-channel reservoir enables you to hold that water and use it later, making the overall system much more efficient. So, good for the folks at the lakes and also good for the farmers downstream because there's going to be, more water available for them to be able to use and again, making the overall system much more efficient. Kind of the exciting thing for Texans, and of course this was an outgrowth of House Bill 4 during the last legislative session, as well as the vote that Texans made in order to take $2 billion from the Rainy Day Fund and put it into the State Water Implementation Fund of Texas. Our charge on this was to kind of take the state water plan and kind of ask ourselves, okay, what are we talking about in terms of the overall cost that we think we're going to have for water projects over the next 50 years? And the answer was $53 billion. And then we said, okay, what regional water planning groups tell us how much of that does the state need to participate in? And the answer was $27 billion over the 50-year period. So we put together a financial model, worked with the legislature, and kind of backed in, if you will, to that $2 billion so that over the term of the 50 years, we can kind of subsidize and help communities in terms of getting loans to be able to kind of stretch the $2 billion into the building power of $27 billion over a 50-year period, and again, fund the state water plan. So we've been planning for many, many years, but this is the first time that Texas has really kind of taken the bull by the horns, led the rest of the country, and said, okay, we are going to fund the state water plan. So to actually be eligible for SWIFT, which is it's a loan program, there are only loans, no grants, you have to be in the state water plan. So if you are a community, you need to ask the question, okay, where are we on our future water needs? Ask the question of your regional water planning group, where is that in the state water plan? It needs to be, a recommended strategy, and then it's eligible for SWIFT financing. So this is just kind of a snapshot of what is available through SWIFT. We have many loan programs, but this is the one that is probably, in many ways, from a financial standpoint, maybe the most lucrative because it takes the full faith in lending of the state, and we have a AAA bond rating, and then it also provides through the SWIFT funding some subsidies to those interest programs. And we basically have 3 programs. We have a loan program which has very low interest rates. So if you are interested in a project and you want anywhere from 20 to 30 years of maturity, you can basically get whatever it's costing the state of Texas for that money, less about 35% for your interest rate. A very low interest financing program, and I would tell you that you won't get a better deal anywhere for sure. If you are working on a project and you need money for planning and design because you don't have your customer base set up yet, we do have deferred loans where you basically pay the principal and interest for a period of 8 years. They have terms for 20 to 30 years, and again, that is an interest rate that is below our cost of funds for the first 20 years. If you go for the 20-year amortization. We also have something called board participation. This is really targeted towards those communities who are looking at regional treatment facilities, where the Water Development Board would actually take, if you will, temporary ownership. The term is about 34 years. You get whatever the interest rate is at our cost of funds, and then over time, you kind of buy the facility back. So at the end of the day, the community owns the treatment plant. So we're seeing a lot of folks that are interested in regional solutions, small communities that maybe one has additional extra treatment capacity available. Maybe a small community that's maybe 30 miles away has some surface water, another that is a short distance away has some groundwater, and they come together, they pool their resources, maybe kind of create, if you will, kind of an underground interstate for water where they can interconnect them all, promote conjunctive use, and then a project that none of them could do individually, and the water supply was not even there individually, can kind of pool their resources and put together a project that can, again, if it's in the state water plan, they can apply for SWIFT funding, and then they have a solution that they can move forward and make sure that all the communities that are served by this regional system have water for the future. Our charge as a board is, of course, to look at all the projects that are submitted through SWIFT, and we just went through the first application process, the first phase of funding. The first phase is, and we think for the next 10 years, every year we're going to loan out about $800 million. For the first round of funding, we got 48 applications requesting $5.5 billion. So the staff is going through all of the projects, kind of looking at them, kind of seeing and talking to the folks, seeing, does everybody need 100% of all the money right up front? Are there some other programs that might work better for you? But we'll be going through those and prioritizing the projects. And this is just basically what was in House Bill 4. I mean, the legislature said, there are certain things that you need to consider in the prioritization that have the highest consideration, and then those things that also you need to have additional consideration for. We worked very hard on this as a board in putting together the rule because we wanted to make sure that there was an equal playing field for big communities as well as rural areas. So if you are a big city and you look at the prioritization criteria, and it's a point system, you see serve a large population, you go, oh, I'm excited about that because I can get 30 points. But if you're a small rural area, particularly if you're one who's looking at a regional solution, you see providing regionalization gets you 30 points, as well as providing a high percentage of your water supply needs. So again, the idea here was to put forth a prioritization schedule. So the prioritization is done by those folks that apply. So it's those folks that kind of get to in the game, and then the staff looks at the prioritization, and the projects that kind of float to the top are the ones that we move forward and ask them to submit more information and then move forward with their application. So from a timing standpoint, we've moved the $2 billion, kind of legged it over into the Texas Safekeeping Trust. So the portion that we're not pulling down and using for actually putting out the loan money is continuing to be invested by the Texas Safekeeping Trust. We've legged in that, so the $2 billion now is in the SWIFT fund. We've received the abridged applications. We got 48. Our staff is going through seeing which ones apply and prioritizing them with the idea that in the summer we will have a bond sale, our first ever SWIFT bond sale, and then in the fall we'll actually close on the loans. And one of the things with SWIFT that we've told communities, because in looking at the financial model, it's going to be very important that as when they close the loan that they close it quickly. When they're awarded it, the loan is closed very quickly. Just wanted to make you aware just very quickly that we do have other programs at the Water Development Board that are available. We do receive some federal money through the federal government that we administer through our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and our Clean Water State Revolving Fund. There is some loan forgiveness money here. It is, for the most part, for those communities that don't have potable water existing or they don't have sewage treatment plants. About 98% of the loans that we do, 98% of the business we do here is are loans and not loan forgiveness. We also have money that we receive from the legislature, basically to do the Economically Distressed Areas Program, or EDAPT. And again, these are our loan forgiveness programs targeted towards communities that are economically distressed, and so we do manage those funds. So again, we have many programs, not just SWIFT, and what we're basically asking folks to do is to come in and talk with us first. We've reorganized the way that we interact with communities. So you have for your area of the state, your very own project manager who has a team that's totally dedicated to do all the work for that particular region. So what we were hearing before was that if you had a question with the Water Development Board, you could, you'd have to pick up the phone and you'd try to reach somebody in planning, or you'd try to reach somebody who is an attorney, and it was almost a game of telephone. Now you have one point of contact. You can create relationships and ongoing with the community and with the Water Development Board, and then they have a whole team of people that can literally take the project from inception all the way through completion, all the resources that you need. We're asking folks to come sit down and talk with us first, because we know we can save communities money with having a low interest, but we can also save communities money by getting that scope tight and getting that scope right. So when you come and sit down with our staff, again, we are the data repository of all the water data for Texas. So if you're considering drilling a water well, our folks can kind of advise you on, kind of what they've seen in that particular area and how successful you might be, and also maybe possibly give you other options, things they've seen in other parts of the state. So we're asking folks, sit down with us first. Let's get that scope tight, because we only want you to borrow as much money as you actually need. So the whole concept here is kind of keeping the size of the pie smaller. So we have money to loan right here at home. There's no loan that is too large and none that is too big. And then we also have the resources and again, these teams can go to communities, or you can come and sit down and talk with us in Austin, and there's a relationship that continues through the project. All of the water data is out on the web, as well as the state water plan. All that information is out there. Our big charge as board members has been to get out across Texas and tell the story. Let people know kind of what we're up to, what our resources are. We exist to serve the people of the state of Texas. We exist to help communities to build water infrastructure, because you can have the technology, you can have the money, but at the end of the day, it's a bottom-up process for implementation. So the community has to have the vision to invest, take the bull by the horns and get those projects started, and pick up the phone and hopefully call us so that we can work with you, again, on the scope of the project and how we might finance it. And oftentimes, it's not one big answer, it's a lot of little answers, and we know that it's all about relationships and working together. This was some work that we did, in Harris County. This was a community that, even though they were very close to Houston, they didn't have sewer, they didn't have fresh drinking water, so we were able to work with them and get those facilities in place, and that is their, I guess, their groundbreaking ceremony. Also wanted to share with you, I think, some great news in terms of what's going on in agriculture. Of course, agriculture is the largest user of water in the state of Texas. But up in the Panhandle, and this was in Stratford, Texas, a group of farmers came together and they kind of issued themselves their own challenge. They said, we ought to be able to grow 200 bushels an acre of corn with 12 inches or less of water, and they called it their 212 program, 200 bushels an acre and 12 inches or less of irrigated water. They initially started and funded the program themselves. They went out and secured the technology. They put the soil moisture meters in. They, of course, had the new type of irrigation watering systems. And to me, what the amazing thing is if you look at some of the projects that are out there that are done in maybe the experimental stations, the plats are maybe half the size of the room. These farmers said, listen, we're going to do it on our own fields. So they really put their own production, if you will, at risk. And it was amazing to go up there and kind of see how their systems operated, because they literally could be in town shopping, and they'd dial in and get the weather information. They'd look at their soil moisture content, and they could regulate their pivots in the field. So, the great news is they set their own target, they met their target, and now they're sharing with others. They're bringing other farmers out to actually see what is happening in the field and telling them and sharing with them how to do it. So, agricultural community reaching out, using their own resources, and sharing their successes with others. So it's really great to see this type of agricultural conservation. And the Water Development Board, I guess, we just about 3 months ago issued a water conservation grant, and we are now have awarded over $100 million to political subdivisions who are working with the agricultural community to promote water conservation for ag. This is some work that we did, the city of Kirbyville, as well as in Brownsville, again, just trying to reach out to communities because, again, we know that this is the key. The people in this room you are key opinion setters. You can be powerful messengers. Most folks just want to go home at night when they finish work, they want to get the kids' homework done, go to the Little League game, and then the whole process starts all over again. So if they've got a question about water, they are going to ask somebody that they trust and respect, somebody that they know is engaged in the issues. And I think we see this across Texas, whether it's a school bond issue, whether it's something to do with economic development. So the fact that you're here today, you are those leaders from your communities. So you're having the information, taking it back, sharing it with your Chamber of Commerce, going outside of what I call water world and going into those organizations that already have, an established membership and established leadership is going to be key in terms of us being able to move forward and to be successful. So these are our 3 board members. I serve in the engineering slot. Carlos Rubenstein is our chairman, and he serves in the financial slot. And then Beck Brune serves in the business and legal slot. So we exist to support communities in Texas. We're all about developing water for Texas. And as we kind of demonstrated here through the data that we shared, and I think through the passion that's in this room, we know a large part of that has to come from water conservation and reuse. And I promise you, we are open to thoughts and ideas. We want them. I personally believe it's not going to come out of Austin. The answers are not going to come out of Austin. They're going to come out of folks who are boots on the ground around Texas and are doing great things. So let us hear from you. If there's anything we can do to help, we serve to be a resource for you. And we think that as we move forward, water conservation is going to be a huge key and a huge asset that we have so that people will continue to want to come to Texas and bring their businesses with them.
Sure, if you have questions for Kathleen, once I wrap up, I'll try not to run real long so you have plenty of opportunity to ask questions. Again, my name's Jeff Leuschel. I'm sort of the outlier here. I'm a municipal bond lawyer. I deal in finance. I've been privileged to represent the Water Development Board for a long time. In fact, one of my great accomplishments was help writing the constitutional amendment that led to the creation of the EDAP program, which has been a tremendous success. EDAP originally was focused on the Rio Grande Valley, but now as the law has evolved, there are communities all around the state that qualify for EDAP financing, and I know the board's currently working on an EDAP financing right now. So it's been a very successful program. As Director Jackson said, SWIFT is not a loan program. It's not a grant program, and it's really not a loan program in the sense that SWIFT is not making loans to political subdivisions. The way the statute works is that SWIFT is a resource that can be drawn upon by another entity under the control of the Water Development Board, another acronym for you to learn, SWIRFT, the State Water Implementation Revenue Fund for Texas. And that is what I am working on right now in developing the legal structure to leverage the $2 billion that Director Jackson referred to and turning it into a $27 billion asset over a 50-year period. That is a challenge. It's an interesting challenge. It's not an insurmountable challenge. And the board and its staff and their advisors, including myself, are working on that right now. In fact, you don't know this, but I've sent the first draft of documents to the General Counsel yesterday for review. So we are moving forward to try to meet that timetable that was outlined earlier, where the first bond sale to access the monies from SWIFT would occur in the summer, and the first loans would be funded in the fall. Now, let's see if I can figure out how to use this. There we go. All right, so we have SWIFT. It's under the control of the Texas Water Development Board. There's a relationship with the Treasurer's Safekeeping Trust Company. We refer to it as the trust company because that 5 words is long and wordy and somewhat hard to roll off the tongue. They control the investment of those monies, and they have invested it not only to allow for short-term distributions, because the board can only ask for money from SWIFT twice in a fiscal year, and they have it invested in a way where not only is it invested in what you would normally think of as safe government treasury obligations, but also in more long-term obligations so that they can maximize the use of that money and leverage it to the maximum extent possible to allow for the transfers to support various state water plan projects and state water plan bonds. The SWIFT and the SWIRFT work in concert. One of the uses of SWIFT money is to be transferred to SWIRFT as a source of revenue or security for bonds that would be issued by SWIRFT. Those monies in SWIFT can also be used to support some of the general obligation bonds that Director Jackson referred to earlier as well. That is not the intention currently. You've got the $2 billion in SWIFT. You have an evergreen, what I mean, I'll explain that in a second, $6 billion in general obligation authority, which basically means as bonds are issued and then repaid, the amounts repaid go back into the authorization, and so you kind of yo-yos up and down, but will never exceed $6 billion. Then you have the programs that were referred to earlier on the federal side, where there's federal programs on the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, where there are state revolving funds. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund has been in place for over 25 years now. There is no safe drinking water revolving fund that has issued bonds yet, but that's in the works as well. There's some legislation that has been filed to address that. The real challenge that exists is trying to meet those objectives in the statute that Director Jackson outlined. And principally, that is a function of legal authority that is already in place that affects the people who will be borrowing money from the board through SWIFT and SWIRFT. For example, most issuers of municipal bonds have contracts, whether they're by ordinance, whether they're by resolution, whether they're by some form of legal document known as a trust indenture. They have covenants and restrictions in them, and one of the ones that is proving to be a challenge in moving this program even further than it's going is that the operations of those documents, the effect of those covenants are that facilities that they can finance must be owned by that issuer of the bonds, whether it's the city of Houston, the city of Austin, MUD, whomever. And that combined with the fact that there is not a whole lot of authority for financing a lot of projects that are now thought of as conservation and reuse projects is presenting a challenge. Some of the things we've talked about or were talked about earlier today with the efforts of conservation through appliances that you use and collecting water through rain barrels and whatnot. Those are all well and good, and they're very valuable. There's no disputing that. But for the city of Houston or the city of Fort Worth or the city of Dallas to try to finance those types of projects is a real challenge, because their covenants say that they can finance property that they own or that they have an interest in. And so as you are working with the board and working in your communities to address how to make this SWIFT program work to the maximum extent possible, you need to keep in mind that that restriction exists. And that restriction is one that there are not a lot of ways right now available to work around. However, one thing that is out there is, and this is in the Natural Resources Code, it authorizes governmental entities to acquire conservation easements. Now, what is a conservation easement? It's sort of what it sounds like. You're buying an interest in property to be able to enforce the reduced use of a natural resource of the state. It's available for any natural resource of the state. Water clearly is one of the natural resources that could be governed by a conservation easement. And the challenge here is, on the one hand, yes, if you're trying to accomplish something with scale, this would be one way to try to do it, because here, property is not something there's any doubt that a entity, a political subdivision, can acquire. Chapter 1502 of the Government Code, which I'll refer to a little later, provides that a utility system is comprised of property and interest in property relating to the production, distribution, and sale of water, wastewater, gas, electricity, et cetera. So here is one way that is available to have discussions on a more larger scale, if you will, as opposed to like making grants available or rebates available if you install low-flow toilets or do other things of that nature. This could have the potential of addressing a significant, not only need in the state, but a need of the SWIFT program in general. Because one could make the argument, and Carol, I'll try not to make the argument the way I made it the last time you were on a panel together. One can make the argument that the 30% of SWIFT is to be available for conservation and reuse. And I say that because the 10% that's available for rural use includes agricultural conservation. And you've got the 20% set aside for conservation and reuse. You've got 10% that arguably could be set aside for agricultural conservation and the like. That's a lot of money. I mean, 30% of $2 billion is a lot of money. It's $600 million. And that is the charge that, on the one hand, the board is diligently out pursuing this. I know the last time I spoke, I followed Chairman Rubenstein at a conference in Austin. I know he is going to be in New Mexico speaking on water issues later this week. I know you and each of the directors have been out promoting the programs that the board has and the issues that are essential if we're going to be serious about leveraging the assets of the state to effect good and meaningful conservation and reuse as well as water development. So this is one tool that's there. It's not one that's been widely used. It's one that has some real potential, again, depending upon location and depending upon political will. One of the things that I've experienced I represent several cities, large cities, in their water and wastewater financing. Their number one tool for conservation is their rate structure. Their second tool for conservation is trying to recapture lost water. Lost water often is water that they aren't getting metered and it's being used but not getting any return on. So those are two areas that, one, rate structures are rate structures. They're great. If they compel conservation, that's great. There's a second side to that, which is they have covenants that they're going to generate rates that are going to create certain amounts of coverage so they can pay their operation expenses, that they can pay their debt service on loans they incur, including loans that may be received from the Water Development Board. If you reduce the amount of water you're selling, you're also going to reduce the amount of revenues you generate. And there are not a whole lot of options to that other than we're going to raise rates. That is a political decision. That's not a regulatory decision on the state level. That's a political decision on the local level. And I don't think I need to remind everybody in here how difficult it is, particularly in recent years when economic times were difficult, to have the discipline to raise rates if you're going to sell less water. The drought's been very effective in teaching conservation. I think that's been manifested through a lot of your programs as well. I know that somebody from Tarrant Regional Water District was speaking earlier. They're a client of our firms. I've had the pleasure of working with them, representing the city of Dallas on a very large regional project where you've seen tremendous cooperation between the city of Dallas and Tarrant Regional Water District, the kinds of things that SWIFT applicants should be looking toward as they try to regionalize the impact of what they're seeking financial assistance for in implementing a state water plan project. You know, it's a textbook example, and it's been highly successful from Dallas's perspective. You know, they could have borrowed the money and done it on their own, but if they had borrowed the money, they'd have to effectively set rates to cover it at 1.25 times its cost. By entering into a contract with Tarrant Regional, they could pay for it at a single 1 times rate coverage because their contract is treated as an operation and maintenance expense. So another way to look at how to structure your applications to go toward a SWIFT loan, SWIFT loan, what have you, is to focus on regionalization, working to establish that your rate structure, although it will be affected by the improvement you're going to finance, can be managed better through the regionalization, through cooperation with other political subdivisions in your area to help manifest the end result, which is a project to meet the state water plan requirements and meet the requirements that are in the SWIFT and SWIRFT profile. Now, when we're talking about water, most of the time, water financing is supported by the revenues, but that's not always the case. Particularly with smaller and mid-sized cities, they are able to issue legal public securities that are secured not only by revenues of their water and sewer system, but with ad valorem taxes. The conservation easement statute provides that counties can issue such an instrument. Section 271.045 is part of a provision of law that's known as the Certificate of Obligation Act, which is the type of security I just referred to. It's a combination, allows you to finance various projects without an election, secured by ad valorem taxes. There's a procedure you have to go through to give notice to allow citizens the opportunity to request and compel an election be held before the obligations can be issued. But the bottom line here is that in certain instances, and this is just for counties, not for cities, that counties could be utilizing the issuance of certificates of obligation to allow them to purchase conservation easements. Again, another way to maximize the impact of conservation efforts through this mechanism and give you some additional authority to kind of defray the costs, because in my world of finance, with rare exceptions, the credit rating and security that is afforded to an obligation that's secured by ad valorem taxes is greater than an obligation secured by revenues. What that means is they can borrow at a little lower interest rate. Not, you know, in the general market, not as low as you can go to the Water Development Board, because those rates are incredibly attractive. But they still are lower than just a solely secured obligation with revenues of your water system. Not everybody can do this. MUDs have certain powers that are similar, but on the local level, again, you've got to look to what the law allows you to do, and then you've got to see if it fits within your financial covenants that are already in place. Almost certainly, it is very difficult to restructure existing financial covenants in my world. I've just tried it with the city of Dallas. We were told that Dallas is one of those rare issuers where they have a AAA rating on their water system. And when we talked about trying to restructure to allow some flexibility in covenants to address some of these types of issues that we're talking about at this symposium, the reaction of the rating agencies, well, that's all well and good, but you're not going to keep your AAA. that is an education issue as much as it is a financial issue. I think that if you're trying to effect conservation through your borrowing power, and you're going to be treated negatively as a result of that through the parties that rate your debt, that is a real problem. That's a real disincentive for local issuers to try to do something differently. And yet, the need is there. And that's why programs like the Water Development Board's program through SWIFT are going to be so essential to meeting that challenge. The Water Development Board really doesn't care what your rating is. I mean, they do in the sense that your loan is going to help them repay their loan, but they're not going to require you to have a AAA rating before they talk to you. They want to see just the basics, your financial capabilities, your engineering capabilities, and your history. So that is why programs such as SWIFT are going to have such a meaningful impact, because it will take a large measure of what I deal with on a daily basis in my law practice and make it more manageable, make it more financially manageable for my clients and clients and issuers that are in the room. All right, this, as I referred to earlier, Chapter 1502 of the Government Code is the primary statutory authority for cities to own, operate, manage water systems, sewer systems, waterworks and sewer systems, and a variety of other systems. Again, this is purely a revenue-based financial structure. And almost every large borrower, large issuer in the state, whether it's Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, they don't have ad valorem tax-supported utility system programs. Theirs are all revenue-supported. And so when you look at the revenue supports mechanisms, again, they all have covenants that say what rates we have to charge. They all have covenants that say what they can finance. And what they can finance are extensions and improvements to their system, however that is defined in their ordinances. And system, again, relates to ownership. So when they're looking at affecting conservation, reuse types of programs, in order to make it work within their borrowing structure, they have to look at one of two things. One, what their rates are and what would be the impact. And two, where in the rate flow would it fit so that they can either maximize their borrowing authority by having what we refer to as parity obligations, which means that this bond and that bond have the same security, which is a first lien on net revenues. Under Texas law, operation and maintenance expenses are paid from gross revenues, so all the revenue pledges are net. And if they can't fit it onto parity, then they have to look to their authorizing document to make sure that they exercise authority that the law provides, that you can use surplus revenues for any lawful purpose. Some say that, some are more restrictive. For instance, Dallas's is they can use it for any lawful purpose not inconsistent with their city charter, because their city charter captures all utility system revenues for use only by the utility system. That's not the case in Austin, where last time I looked, about $100 million of their budget is funded by surplus electric system revenues. So one thought we had, a number of us in this room have discussed, what can we do legislatively to help encourage conservation and reuse if the traditional means are not effective or they can't really be utilized principally in the private sector? I mean, one of the problems that we have is, and the Water Development Board is no exception to this, they cannot make loans to private entities. My clients as cities cannot generally make loans to private entities as well. There is an exception to that, but I don't want to get into that. I want to make sure everybody stays awake. So what we've been looking at is a way to utilize borrowing power to maximize the ability to leverage conservation in the state. And as a result of that, you have a bill that was filed by Representative Lucio, House Bill 1228, in which municipalities will be authorized, if this were to become law, to finance what we called water conservation infrastructure. Now, water conservation infrastructure, part of that already exists, as we've discussed, but part of the methodology employed by the legislation would be to allow local governments to borrow money and make loans and funds available to private entities to effect water conservation. Some of the projects you were talking about would be perfect examples of what could be made to be worked through this bill if it were to become law, by encouraging the borrowing power of a municipality to take the ability to borrow at lower interest rates than most private companies can because they're more creditworthy, and loan that to effect conservation and reuse projects. We're looking long and hard at what is out there to try to make SWIFT work as well as it can. And there are a lot of tools already in place, and Director Jackson has referred to many of those tools in her remarks. We need to have more tools in the toolbox in order to really maximize what we can do both through SWIFT and through other means to affect the needs for water conservation and development in the state. You saw the chart at the beginning of after lunch. The population growth and the water demands in the state are just going to skyrocket. There is not a whole lot there that we can do to say, we're not going to let you fly into Houston. We're not going to let you drive across the Red River. We're not going to let you come in through the Panhandle and come populate this state. One of the other things that I see through my firm's legal practice is there's a large number of people who are moving to this state who are childless, and they're having children, and they're filling into the school districts all throughout this state. And you just look around at the billions of dollars that the independent school districts are having to spend throughout this state to meet that demand. That demand's not going to go away. And what comes with that demand will be the need for water. And so we're working very hard on a number of fronts, both to get SWIFT to be leveraged in the way we all hope and envision, so that we can stretch that $2 billion to $27 billion. We have programs on the state level besides SWIFT that are easily accessible, that provide lots of financial incentive and a lot of interest savings, which impact favorably ratepayers. And we have to think outside the box a bit, try to make some of these projects work, where maybe if we had public-private partnerships with entities that are doing desalinization, and the local side or the public side of it is to help finance it in a way that's more cost-effective. That too is a tool we need, and a tool that hopefully we can convince the legislature, if not this session, in a future session, to allow us to have the authority to pursue. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, we've got time for for Q&A right now, and then we will move into our last panel. So, Michael Bloom, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks both of you for your comments. I guess I had a question for Kathleen. The prioritization scores, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about how the scoring process will, I guess, there's a tension between the scoring process and the 20%, no less than 20% that conservation.
Okay. Kind of, I was saying, I think that, this first go-around is kind of like our first time. And so a lot of what we're going to be doing is, moving forward, measuring our success, seeing those things that work, and then just kind of asking ourselves, okay, did we get our intended outcome, and do we need to change things? The 20% and the 10% is really, intended to be kind of like a long-term. For us, it's a floor. It's not a ceiling. So I think our intent would be to look out and see those things that do promote water conservation. Personally, what I would like to see is that we have, some projects in all of the various areas, so that, because I think kind of what, success begets success. So if we can get, a good brackish project going, we can get a good project that maybe promotes interconnects, we can get a good water conservation project going. I mean, those are more than just numbers that are on a page. I mean, they're actual success stories that communities have had. So from the prioritization, I mean, that's kind of the starting point for our staff. And of course, it was a process that we developed as part of the rule, but it was built from what was included by the legislature in House Bill 4. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I mean, I think that's our intent as we move forward, to make sure that, we have, all types of projects. That was certainly the intent, is to make sure that we have a large diversity of projects and projects throughout the state, and that we're meeting and moving forward with the needs of all the various sectors.
One thing I want to add is that the obligation is can be met over a 5-year period. It's not like in the first round of loans, 20% have to go for reuse and 10% have to go for ag. That's the goal for the 5-year period, not for each year. One of the things that we will be doing, we being myself, General Counsel's office, the board's financial advisors, will be meeting with the State Attorney General's office to work through that part of the puzzle. One of the things I didn't state is that in any issuer of municipal bonds in the state of Texas, they have to be approved by the State Attorney General, and that doesn't. The board has to go through it. The city of Houston has to go through it. The MUDs in this room who have issued bonds, they have to go through it, and that's one of the talking points we'll be exploring with them in the next couple of months.
So I can't miss the opportunity for the pitch, which is, we want to see those projects coming in. So, for the first round, the deadline has passed, so we'll be, looking at, the pool of projects that came in for the first round of funding. But to the extent that folks who, have a passion and see the value of water conservation, because hopefully, that would be the outcome. As we demonstrated, the water conservation projects provide a source of water much more cost effectively than if you have to go, build different types of infrastructure. So to that extent, we need those projects. So if you can work with the regional water planning groups, make sure that that is in the state water plan, and then have communities that come up with the thoughts and ideas for those projects, but then also want to move them forward. Then you get in the running, then you get in the pool for the SWIFT funding. So to the extent y'all have thoughts and ideas and projects, I mean, that would be very helpful, because I promise you we want to do those things. We need a third of our needs going to come from conservation and reuse.
So I'll apologize if I didn't understand everything that you said on the legal side. So if I'm a mid-sized utility and I'm interested in expanding my level of conservation beyond what my operating budget can support currently, and so I'm looking for supplemental funding, I'm considering a SWIFT application or a loan to expand the level of conservation activity. Are you essentially saying that if that conservation activity results in property that I cannot own, that I would need to use a conservation easements funding mechanism as a way to create a
I wouldn't say you misunderstood it. So you caught the essence of it quite well. I think part of what we'd have to look at is what exactly the conservation element is that you're seeking to finance that you did not own. Because that will have two impacts potentially. One is the board is borrowing money on a tax-exempt basis. Private loans and private financing generally cannot be done on a tax-exempt basis. They have to be done on a taxable basis. And while the board can make loans to you for a taxable project, they are restricted in the amount of the overall loans they can make for taxable projects. So that would be one element. The other would be if you're a city, then or other type of governmental authority, you'd have to look at Chapter 183 of the Natural Resources Code to determine whether you want to go through those mechanisms. They're not that complicated, but there are legal issues that you'd have to address to determine whether you want that piece of your financing needs to be addressed through a loan from the board. I think the other unstated thing, of course, is they all have to be part of the water plan. If it's not a water plan eligible project, SWIFT won't work for you. Other programs of the board would, but SWIFT would not.
Yes. Just to follow up, can you talk about how Alpha 1228 might change that analysis?
Well, it does two things. It clearly defines what water conservation infrastructure is to allow private entities to be eligible to be have their properties be financeable by a municipality. There's also it ties in another constitutional provision that does not affect the board but affects cities. It's Article 3, Section 52A of the Constitution that allows municipalities to make loans and grants of public funds for private purposes. One of the big problems that you have when you're trying to assist private entities is public purpose. Now, there are rules that allow you to get around that. If the monies are being made available to a private entity that satisfy a clear public purpose, that you have clear controls over the monies that are being expended, that you have ways to account for those monies so that you're assured that they're going to be spent on the public purpose, and that you get consideration through that, then notwithstanding that I'm helping you as a private entity, that still would be permissible. But often these projects don't just meet that test. So that's why we wrote the legislation to try to make that happen. Yes, right there.
I'll make this quick. It's a small thing. I'm vice president of Big Oaks Flood, which is right over Harris County line into Richmond, so we're Richmond County. Two officers here with me. We have quite an amount of land next to our water treatment plant. This is the sewer, the treatment plant. I've got different things, two different locations. There's land there where we can build a soccer field. We have about 2,100 or so bats, I think. I thought that was a small mud. They said, no, that's not really. But we lack any kind of activities for our children to do. And so sometimes they play basketball in the cul-de-sacs and, whatever. But I have had a desire in my heart to see us make a soccer field or other type means and reuse water to water it with. But we have to have money for our plant or something. So is that a practicality or is that like thinking too small or too silly?
I would just say that there are many projects around Texas where they've done exactly that. They've taken treated water and they use it to, water golf courses or soccer fields or whatever. So there's precedent to doing it. So.
I think you said something, though, that I would like to comment on. I don't think there's any thought that you should think is too silly. Not in this environment. I mean, it may seem kind of weird and kind of off the beaten track, and it may not work, but A lot of thoughts outside the box end up working because people ignore the fact that they think it's silly. They want to pursue it. And I think that your question allows us to reiterate that. There's no such thing, as I say to my associates, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And there really isn't such a thing as a silly thought. It may prove to be silly, but until you explore it, you just don't know. So it's worth always exploring. Yes.
I have a question on chapter 1502 and 1228. Is that restrict the provisions just municipalities?
Yeah, that is correct.
Would it extend the laws?
It would not. It would not. And I was sort of I think the reason was more tactical. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. The question was the House Bill 1228 does it apply only to municipalities and thus only affects those who are governed by Chapter 1502 of the Government Code? The answer is yes. The reason why was a tactical one. There is a large community of municipalities that have these powers that would like to, could make the case for using it. And so it was a political judgment. That doesn't mean it can't be amended as it goes through the process, but that was the tack that was taken in the drafting of it. I don't see any more hands going up. Oh, I did now. I'm sorry, this is a silly question. You're not allowed to ask it.
No, not a detail. In that instance, if we borrowed money, would we have to sign over the ownership of the Big Oaks mud to you all? That will come up.
Well, I would. Yeah, well, the question is. I think the question is: would we have to sign over a security interest in the property if we were to try to finance the fields or to finance the use of tertiary water to service the fields? The short answer is no. I mean, the board has no specific legal rights to compel you to provide a security interest in property. They will want a security interest, of course, in the revenues, which you wouldn't have, obviously wouldn't have any problem with. There's plenty of legal authority for systems to grant deeds of trust, but nobody uses it because who wants to end up having a foreclosure and end up owning a water treatment plant? I mean, it just doesn't, it's just not very palatable or effective as a legal remedy.
I would just say further, our charge as a board is to make sure that whatever entity that we are, lending money to, has the ability to repay. And so, we do a very comprehensive financial review, and that's not just at the onset of the project, but that's through the life of the project to make sure that, there is fiduciary responsibility to make sure that because I mean that's good for us, and we have an obligation to the taxpayers, but that's also good for the community because we don't want any community jumping off and doing something that they, can't be successful in. So, and with that, I guess I can knock on wood and say that we've never had at the Water Development Board a defaulted loan.
Thank you.